Today is Friday, August 29th, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, and I'm here again with my podcast co-host partner, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, how about this unseasonably cool late August?
I'm all for it. It's honestly been a comfortable summer here in the southern part of the United States. It's been really pretty nice, so I'm not complaining. It's been great.
Okay, a lot of things going on in the world. We even got a public mention somewhere that we might go into later. What are we talking about this morning? Almost afternoon.
It is almost afternoon.
Late morning.
Yeah. Well, it comes up from time to time. I want to make sure with our young audience that you understand where we're coming from. For those who listen to our work and they hear our take on prophecy, it's a big question for them. It's actually the cover article of the Tomorrow's World about to go out for September, October. We thought, you know what? This is actually a worthwhile topic to discuss with all of you. We want to talk about biblical reasons why we believe the United States, the United Kingdom, and many other nations are Israel in prophecy. That is, when you read about Israel in prophecy, there's a reason that we do apply those prophecies to these nations, and they're biblical reasons. We thought, great to go over it.
That sounds good. Let's go through it.
Thanks for hanging around through the music, and welcome to the podcast. Actually, we should highlight, we have, and it's a little unavoidable, we have some construction, a bit of a project going on not too far from our recording location, which is Mr. Robinson's office, actually out of his window. It's a long-needed project for the stairs here to the back of the building. And it's not too noisy, and we have found in general, I think, Mr. Robinson, I've been surprised how the microphones don't pick up a lot of noise that I thought they would.
Yeah.
But if you do hear some noise, we apologize. Hopefully we're coming across loud and clear.
Just consider it progress. The work is growing.
And, Mr. Robinson said a while ago, he says, well, if they have a problem, we can just let them know that their next podcast is free.
That's right. So. That's right. We are believers in satisfaction guarantees.
That's right. So this topic about when we read about Israel in prophecy, and by the way, we should say overall, and hopefully this will come out here and there, we are not saying that the modern nation of Israel that currently exists in the Middle East, currently where the situation is going on with Gaza and other things, we're not saying that they are not also Israelites, very specifically that they are the people of the kingdom of Judah in particular. There's all these groups out there that want to say that somehow the Jews aren't actually Jews, and we're definitely not saying that. We do believe they are. However, the fact is, Israel is more than the Jews. It refers to all the tribes of Israel, in particular, in many cases, what were the northern 10 tribes that had separated from Judah. And I have a personal relationship with this particular idea, because when I first came into the church, when I first came into this truth that we understand, this one kind of caught me. What drew me to the truth of the Bible was not necessarily prophecy and those things. It really was more the fact that things I had long believed were not actually reflected in the Bible. It was actually the doctrines of the Bible in terms of how God wants to be worshiped. What is He like? All of those. That's really what brought me in. And it really wasn't until I sought to begin obeying those things and was actually attending a congregation near me that I really was confronted in a way with some of this that I don't know if I'd paid attention to it quite the same way. And I saw these prophecies being tossed around, and they're talking about Israel, but yet they're being applied to the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, Canada, many other nations, and also including some nations in the western part of Europe. And I thought, I don't know. Right.
That sounds pretty far-fetched.
Yeah. I had already come to realize that scientists could be wrong about some of their conclusions, but now the historians too, right? Because I didn't see any major historian that was certainly claiming that is the case. And, you can present all sorts of physical evidence might be too strong. Well, I actually like the word evidence. Evidence doesn't mean proof. It just means evidence. It has to be evaluated. You can provide all sorts of evidence concerning legends, concerning migration paths. All these things you can provide, and all those things can be helpful. But for me, what really sold me and caused me to embrace it was the Bible, what the Bible has to say. And you can see literally, I say literally, that's the wrong use of the word. You can see the 10 tribes kind of disappearing, being taken off by Assyria and all that. And yet you have promises in the Bible, like in Amos chapter 9 and verse 9. Right there, God says, "For surely I will command and will sift the house of Israel among all nations, as grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground." I have heard many explanations about those prophecies concerning the future of Israel. Explanations from the Lutheran camp or the Baptist camp or the Catholic camp, all these different kinds of camps. None of them satisfy like the truth of the Bible that we actually teach in the Living Church of God. And it's passages like Amos chapter 9, verse 9. I didn't need to spiritualize this away. I recognize that God really was going to keep track, and however he decides those things, he was going to keep track of these peoples, and he was truly going to deal with those peoples that were the inheritors of the physical promises to Abraham, not the spiritual promises to Abraham, which apply to all who become a part of the body of Christ, no matter our origins, but these kind of physical promises to Abraham. It was the Bible that convinced me that those things were so. And one of the things I like about this Tomorrow's World magazine coming out, which by the way, let's see, it's August 29th. Some of you might actually get this magazine before you hear this podcast. The cover article, which by the way, Mr. Robinson, fantastic work on your team there concerning the cover, and Mr. Ben Graham, our graphics designer.
I never get tired of taking credit for Ben's work.
The title on the cover is "The Hidden Birthright Nations of Israel." A little subheading there: "How Understanding the Identity of Jacob's Descendants Unlocks Bible Prophecy." And it's kind of a beautiful, I just love how they all fit so well. You've got actually a picture of London up at the top, and then you've got a Statue of Liberty there near New York and Manhattan in the middle, and then you've got Australia and Sydney and the Opera House, and nations you wouldn't normally associate with Israel, as being tied in an actual physical sense to Israel versus treaties and things like that. But the fact of the matter is that is the case. And so what Mr. Robinson and I talking about this, we thought what we would do today is just hit some of the big points. Please read the article when you get it. The article goes into so much more detail than we're going to. But hit some of those big points about why it really is the Bible that requires these things to be true, not just what you might read in terms of history or things like that.
Yeah. I as we've mentioned many times, I grew up in the church. So I had no choice but to believe in. No, I'm just kidding. But I remember sitting in the church at various ages, this booklet getting mentioned all the time. And I think at the time it was maybe Great Britain. It was the U.S. and Great Britain in prophecy or some variation of that. And it wasn't, though, until I was an adult that I really understood why it was a big deal and why I should pay attention to it. And I might mention as we go into it, just as like a good big picture thing to keep in mind, is that the idea that modern Americans and modern British and British Commonwealth and some of Northwest Europe and we've speculated over the years on all the tribes where they may have ended up, and it's roughly around Northwest Europe, and then of course the U.S. and of course England having their own Commonwealth countries of Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa.
Yeah. Oh, forgive me, New Zealand, if I didn't mention you earlier. Yeah, New Zealand.
And that, wow, is it possible that the tribes, because, if you go read the end of 2 Kings, when God is really, if I may, thoroughly disgusted with Israel and casting them out of the lands and using tribes that weren't too gentle to just cast them out of that area, and then they kind of filtered into the new area. And while there is some good extra biblical evidence, I think, here and there that you can kind of chart where they went, I found the same thing you did, which was the best evidence is really in the Bible, the best support for all of it. And at the very least, that God has not lost track of them. Did you ever watch any of the 1970s Battlestar Galactica?
Oh, man, did I ever. Especially coming off of Star Wars, I was so excited. There was some kind of space program, It only lasted a season, but I ate it up.
Okay, but do you remember this?
By the way, for those listening, they did redo Battlestar Galactica later, and it's far more racy and stuff. And no, I have not partaken of that. We're talking about 1970s, 1980. Actually, it might have been exactly 1980. I'm not sure, but you bet I did.
Well, do you remember that had a theme of the Lost Tribes?
There was kind of that. Yeah, in fact, I think later when I started attending, hearing from some church people that kind of excited them, the idea of
Yep.
lost tribes of
Well,
humanity.
I went back and looked it up because it was quite fascinating. And so the show has this belief that there were 13 tribes, and 12 of them settled in one area, and there's this missing tribe. And the missing tribe found Earth, and that's where...
And they're trying to
And they
find
do
them.
actually get to Earth eventually.
Well, yeah, in the first season, they did not. The first season, because I remember, they did actually receive a broadcast, like the moon landing broadcast, traveling through space eventually. People have even taken that. The fact that on the Galactica, they received that because it's continuing to propagate through space, these radio signals. And they used that to calculate, well, how far must they be from Earth? They eventually tried to... When they realized they did have perhaps a hit on their hands, it was one of those they kept moving around the schedule. They actually tried a second series called Galactica 1980. In fact, that was 1980. I misspoke earlier. That was in the 70s. That was just terrible. It really the production value was lower. Different actors. It has maybe one good episode, and in that one they find Earth and they're doing their best to, I guess, interact with Earth without freaking. It just gets weird. But that was a great show. I loved it.
But the idea that the tribes didn't just disappear into time and essentially cease to exist. This is actually a pretty key.
For the tribes of Israel in this case.
What did I say?
Yeah. Well, we just talking about Battlestar Galactica.
Oh yeah,
make sure
right,
they know we're back on. We're back on Israel. That's
getting
right.
back to a profitable podcast. It's a pretty big deal that God promises to preserve Israel down through time.
Oh, yeah.
And when Christ returns, it will become obvious to everybody will understand this. But for now, it's a real church distinctive that we understand that the tribes are not gone, and in fact, the modern tribes of Israel, being the U.S. and England and so on, is really pretty amazing. That not only have they been preserved, but then also that's how the and I know I'm getting ahead a little bit here. That's how the promises to Abraham are being fulfilled. And, there's been some people that were real, historical people that were pretty big Bible believers, but then they kind of got stuck on, well, what happened to the tribes of Israel and these promises? And they just, or where are they in modern times? And they start to think that the Bible is discredited. And so this is, it's actually kind of a big deal for a number of reasons.
It really is. And there's different approaches out there. Some that switch out the church for Israel, because the church, the body of Christ, does represent, in a sense, the godly Israel of God, as Paul says. But it was interesting. I just saw a debate recently, not a debate, that's the wrong way to put it, an exploration, if you will, of a fellow who's kind of a quote unquote Christian scholar out there. It seemed like a really nice fella, but trying to explain the different ideas on how to understand what Paul has to say in Romans 11 and such, where he says all Israel will be saved. And they struggle with it because they don't have the understanding we're going to be talking about today, and let alone the understanding of what the last great day symbolizes in the holy days and all these other things. And they wrestle with that, and they try to spiritualize a lot of things away that I have found when you really go into depth and detail in the prophecies, you just can't spiritualize them all away. Yep. That was part of what I encountered. I said there's clearly promises here that I just can't turn all of them into spiritual prophecies that are fulfilled by Jesus Christ and by the church. They're clearly physical promises that do refer to a physical people. And when you see God saying things like he says in Amos chapter 9 and other places, then either he is a really bad speaker, somehow, and he's making himself even vaguer than he normally seems to intend to be, if you want to describe it that way in places, or else I can simply trust what the words say, and that he was keeping track of the physical people, and his promises to Abraham do involve promises to even his physical descendants, even today.
Well, I might mention also then the other important, why this matters, and it doesn't get as mentioned as much, or I don't hear it as much as I did maybe in the past, and that is, and another reason why it can't be spiritualized away. We could not understand end time prophecy if we didn't understand the modern identity of the ancient nations that we're talking about. How do we know where Assyria is, or why do we think Germany is Assyria, and why that matters? Like, you can't understand the prophecies if you don't understand the ancient identities.
Yeah, Mr. Richard Ames was always so good about emphasizing that you have to, because the Bible has all these ancient names, and for some peoples you ought to think, oh well, I guess there is no prophecy about them because they're gone. Well, are they gone? If the Bible talks about them in the future, and it clearly is a reference to the future, then either prophecy has failed, and we know that it does not in the sense that what God has said isn't going to happen, or they must exist somewhere, and it's a matter of knowing where they are. And that's the case in what we have today. So as we go through some of these things, we're not saying this is the single airtight case. Listen to this podcast and you've got it all forever. I'd have to say, one, again, read the article that's coming out in the September-October issue. In fact, I spent more time giving credit to us and our teams for the cover and didn't actually credit the author. And that would be Mr. Stuart Wachowicz, evangelist in Canada. Appreciate him very much there, running that side of the work. Thank you very much.
We also
Mr.
did
Stuart
a podcast with him, by the way.
We did do a podcast with him, and he is just so knowledgeable and fun to talk to. We would encourage you to go listen to that podcast, but don't stop this one. Finish this one first. So he is the one who wrote this great article, but also encourage you to go to our booklet on the topic, our free booklet, The United States and Great Britain in Prophecy. That's going to be about, that really is extremely thorough. And Mr. John Aguin, another evangelist, the late John Aguin, wrote that booklet and goes through in so much more detail than we certainly will today. All right, that's, Mr. Robinson, some of the construction outside, because they're working on some metal, and it almost sounds like whale sounds here and there, and then you realize then the whale's choking on something or something. Anyway, it's pretty loud, but hopefully you guys are not hearing all of that.
Or choking.
All right, our first point. The first point that we want to make today, in terms of trying to understand, why is it that we do identify these things? Why is it when we see Israel in prophecy, well, we identify that with the United States, the United Kingdom, the British descended peoples, and some of these other nations. The first thing you have to start with is an understanding that after King Solomon, Israel, the land of Israel, the nation of Israel, if you will, the 12 tribes together, split into two different nations. There were the 10 northern tribes and then the 2 southern tribes. Those northern tribes retained the name Israel, and the 2 southern tribes were named after the prominent tribe in that case, which is Judah. The 2 tribes in the south were Judah and Benjamin, and the 10 tribes in the north were all the others. Well, not exactly all the others, right, Mr. Robinson? Levi was sort of scattered about. The Levites didn't have a land, for themselves.
Well, one of the first things by the way, let me support how important this is. I can't tell you how many times when I've been working on either in the olden days sermonettes or more recently sermons, how often when I wanted to talk about Israel in general, ancient Israel, right, I found myself always my brain would wander back to, first you have to understand there was this split. And I came back to it all the time. But like after the split was the first king of Israel, Jeroboam. The first thing he did was let non-Levites be priests. And many of the Levites packed up and went home. And so a lot of the Levites ended up down primarily with Judah at the time. Anyway, I'm getting a little nerdy there. But
that is a great observation, because it does get a little bit messy, because the 2 tribes in the south were Judah and Benjamin. But yes, there were also Levites there, because that is the tribe from which priests come from.
If you wanted to remain faithful to the true teachings of God and you were a Levite, you couldn't do it in Israel anymore.
Because Israel departed really fast. In fact, if you do read the record of kings of both Israel and Judah, the 2 nations, the 2 kingdoms that split from each other, at least in Judah, you get a good king every once in a while. In Israel, it is never good kings. From that point on, they had nothing but terrible, sinful kings. So there's also a dusting of individuals from the northern tribes. Even in the New Testament, you will see occasionally, you'll come across a person who's not actually from Judah or Benjamin, but they come from one of the other tribes. It's a very small number. And that's why I would highlight, again, like what I read in Amos chapter 9 and verse 9. God isn't making a promise to just these ones. It is to the whole house. He said he's going to sift them from the nations, and not a single grain is going to fall. So you have Judah and you have Benjamin. You have just a dusting of some from the other nations that happened to maybe flee what was coming on those tribes and coming south. The question is, where are all the other 10 tribes? Even in Josephus, we just jump into history. Josephus recognized Those other 10 tribes still exist. And he was a contemporary of Jesus Christ. He says in Josephus that they're somewhere out there beyond the Euphrates. They're still there, and they're massive in number. Well, if that's the case, God has to keep track. And you see, so what do we see in modern Israel today? That is the land of Israel, currently governed by Mr. Netanyahu and the Knesset there and those. What is that? That is Judah. That's where the people who are the Jews get their name. They get them from Judah.
And we might mention that Mr. Smith and I talked about this during our show prep. I love saying show prep.
It does make you feel professional, doesn't it?
How there's a lot of people out there that have, I don't want to even say understanding, but like that preach about this kind of thing, and some of these future prophecies that are going to occur after the return of Christ, well, they think they've already been fulfilled because they conflate who Judah is and who Israel is, and they don't really understand the distinctions, and they think Israel, modern day Israel, is all of Israel, and they've been all gathered back together. And fact check, no.
That's right. That's right.
We still need about 10 more tribes, 10, 11, depending on how you want to count it.
Yeah, you do. They'll think that Israel coming together to form the nation of Israel, the Jews coming together to do that, was a fulfillment of like the great second Exodus, as opposed to saying, no, that is a tiny part. It's so much more massive when you read in the Bible. That might have been a precursor, or it might be a type of the greater second Exodus to come. And definitely needed to be in place because the Bible speaks of Judah as being like a roaring lion. We've discussed that a little bit too. So there had to be they had to have military power in the last days. But is that the fullness of that? No, it clearly isn't.
I mean, I could never really prove this, but I mean, the very fact that Israel, which is tiny compared to the hostile nations around them, many of them hostile, and yet they somehow have this, sounds so condescending, plucky little Israeli defense force out there, like very powerful force, is kind of remarkable. That's unusual that they would be that effective militarily.
Oh yeah, Mr. Joel Weston highlights that in some of his writings in Tomorrow's World about how it's clearly evidence that Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. So as we wrap up this first point, part of the point to understand is that there are many prophecies in the Bible about Israel that were clearly, historically, never fulfilled by Judah. That is, by the Jewish people and the modern nation of Israel. And that was part of what sold me, was these prophecies. I know God isn't lying. I know if God said these things were going to happen, they're going to happen. And yet, if the modern nation composed of the Jews, the descendants of Judah and Benjamin and such, if they haven't fulfilled these things, then where are the other 10 tribes that will be fulfilling them? And so that's, as we'll get into we'll get into some of these promises that were not fulfilled by the people of Judah, but were fulfilled by these other nations we're going to talk about today. For instance, the second one, there's a prophecy in Scripture that Israel would become many nations, not just one nation, let alone just one nation in the Middle East, and not just they'd have people in a bunch of nations, but that Israel, the descendants of Abraham, would actually generate many nations. And even then, not just talking about his descendants through Ishmael and such, but actually through Isaac and Jacob would become many nations. And I think we have references to... It is a little distracting hearing them grind outside, but I'm really afraid, Ms. Robbins, we're going to listen to this and it's going to be like a bunch of, but I have been surprised, actually, these microphones, how little the noise is.
They really cleaned up our problem we had when we first started podcasting, which was, again, they're related, this exterior staircase that needed some big, frankly, it was, in the future was going to be a danger. It had some structural.
Yeah, it need to be addressed.
But all the LE kids would go out that way.
Oh, the door.
So
kept
at the right
slamming,
time,
right.
the door would open, and they couldn't get together and all leave at the same time. It had to be one at a time. So the door opens and closes 12 times. But it I'm trying to be funny, but it was so loud we could hear it so clearly in the room. But these mics really kept it from.
Yeah, I tend to forget that about how good these mics do, because one of the podcasts I did recently where you were out of town, Mr. Robinson, I remember hearing it was the announcement come over our PA system, and I made a note to myself, I need to go back and edit that out, and I redid it. Well, I totally forgot to edit out one of many editing mistakes in that podcast, if you go back and listen to it. And many people said, you need to fix it. It's like, I'm so sorry, I know. But yet, if you listen to it, you just hear me muttering to myself. You don't even hear the announcement because the microphone just made me sound like a crazy old man. All right, so So the prophecy that Israel would become many nations. We can look at Genesis chapter 17 as an example for that. Genesis 17, verses 5 through 6. God says to Abraham, actually making him Abraham, he says, "No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of many nations, and I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you." Now, as we'll see, kings did come from Judah, but Judah has not become many nations. And Sarah is in there too. It's I was trying to remember my wife and think, hey, Sarah's a part of all this too. In verses 15 through 16, it says, God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of many nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her." Now, that's important because some might point to Ishmael as the source for Abraham. Well, Ishmael certainly begot. There's many different nations, Arabic nations, etc. But no, God is very specific. He is speaking of the descendants to come through the one son, Isaac. That is what he's talking about. And we just don't see, if you're just looking at Judah, even just the two nations, the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, you don't see multiple nations with multiple kings and such. You don't see that coming out of them. And so that's a good indication there has to be some other fulfillment. There has to be some other nations that fulfill those things.
Yeah, that's a pretty important distinction to make.
Yeah, and I credit to Mr. Mohavich. He's the one that kind of brings that out. And I, again, take a look at our booklet.
Because really, right, Abraham actually has a whole bunch of heirs. If you count after Sarah died, he had a second marriage, and I think he had eight more kids after. So you had Ishmael, Isaac, and then his second life. I don't know, but I forget that sometimes. It's remarkable to me that Abraham had
had sons afterwards as well through Keturah, I think was her. However, that's part of why I think the Sarah point is important,
totally
because
agree.
it's not, we're not talking about those other wives. We're talking about through Sarah specifically. All right. The next point, it says the Bible indicates that the birthright nations, and that's important, the birthright nations. As we see, the birthright would normally go to the oldest, but in Abraham's case, it does not.
Maybe for some of our younger listeners, you could just give a brief, kind of define birthright. Like why is that significant? Like what does that mean, birthright nations?
Yeah, sure. I think we can summarize it in just kind of plain speech. When it comes to how God sets up things with inheritance and such, generally the oldest son had extra responsibilities. He was kind of like a subhead of household. There was certain, as the father got older, even died something, the son was expected to take care of certain things. But also what came with that was extra blessing. There are extra blessings for the firstborn in recognition of that. Even when it comes to the spiritual life of the church, all of us to be born at the resurrection, Jesus Christ is the firstborn in that way. We went through the resurrection first, and of course, he definitely has greater honor and glory than we will have. But in the case of Abraham, the firstborn was Reuben, the tribe of Reuben. Not to say Abraham, sorry. In this case, we're talking about Jacob or Israel, so Abraham's grandson, as we're multiplying the tribes. Of the 12 tribes, oh, by the way, that's something we didn't explain earlier. If Levi doesn't count as one of the 10 tribes to the north, how do you still get 12? And we'll probably talk about them here a bit later, given the topic. But one of the tribes, which would be the tribe of Joseph, ends up splitting into two tribes, and that's Ephraim and Manasseh. And we get to that when we start talking about this very topic, the birthright nations, because the normal birthright in this case would be Reuben. Reuben was the oldest of all of Jacob's sons, so he would be the birthright son. However, Reuben had a bit of a dalliance with with his father's concubine, and that even back then that was a no-no. You don't do that kind of thing. And so as a result, he lost out on being the birthright son, and that birthright passed to Joseph and the sons of Joseph. And those sons were Ephraim and Manasseh. And what it says of the birthright nations, what Israel would have, we see in Genesis chapter 22, verses 15 through 17. God says, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. Your descendants shall possess the gate of your enemies. I think in the article it notes that this promise was even repeated, not just to Abraham, but also to Isaac, his wife, Rebekah. And that has a few different meanings. Among the meanings, a gate, the gate of your enemies, the gate of any people. Back then they had walled cities, and the gate was how you got in.
Yeah.
That was it.
A gate's real simple. It's open or it's closed.
That's right. It's a choke point.
Yep.
And so Israel, what nations in the world have possessed so many of the choke points of the world? If you look at Gibraltar, you look at Suez, the Straits of Malacca, you look at, what nations? It's been the United States and the United Kingdom. Even look at the Panama Canal in that sense. Of course, we're giving these up over time, but there's just no nations in the world that have possessed these kind of choke points to the same extent that the
Right.
British descended nations have.
Yeah, and it actually really is a big deal. These around the world, these various choke points. A lot of stuff still moves along the ocean, and I might, as a modern example, I might mention like one of the reason China's interested in retaking Taiwan and some of these other things is because they're kind of trapped where they are.
Yeah.
It's not easy for them to get out, and they know it, and that's why if you follow China at all, they've made all these little man-made. They have those little atolls out there that's barely land, sticking out of the water, and they've tried to build bases on them as a way to like give them more free access. If the United States really wanted to, you could really easily pin China in to their mainland and not be able to get around, and that's like a powerful thing to either have control of, or it's a powerful thing in a negative way to be beholden to. Like you can't get out and do what you want because another nation is preventing you.
Yeah, it's very easy. People are very quick to write off other nations' actions as just somehow because they're evil. It's like, well, why does China want Taiwan? Because they're evil, and that's why. It's like, well, also they're strategic, and they recognize, this is kind of rough on us not having full control of this. We really need this.
And Taiwan's a pretty prosperous country, so.
Oh yeah, there's that too, and even some gates that we haven't maybe completely owned in some case, we still provide the strategic support where in the end, we're the ones keeping them open. And that kind of blends a little bit into the other meaning of gates. And Mr. Wahhabich brings this out in his article. The gate of a city was also a place where there was a lot of administrative authority, that the gate was actually the place where deals were struck, where decisions were made.
Business is conducted.
Right. And a good biblical example is that with Boaz. When Boaz was in the Bible, when he was trying to settle the matter with Ruth, where did they meet? Well, they met at the gate. You look even in heathen lands, when you take a look at the story of Esther, when they had been, the Jews were there in captivity, and you have Mordecai. Where is Mordecai seen and frustrates Haman so much? He's there at the king's gate. That was a place of authority. That was a place of honor to be. Well, what nations in the world have had that kind of administrative authority virtually all over the globe? Actually, very literally all over the globe. Now, it's easy for America to think, oh, yeah, that's us. Well, you go historically, and you got to look at the British Empire.
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason that the Pax Britannica preceded the Pax Americana, because, as the old saying was, the sun never set on the British Empire. They were in you go to some land that, let's just say, it seems like the least English place you've ever been in the world, and you go to the places of power, and who's there? You'd see representatives of the British Kingdom and the British consulate.
Yeah, we could go on about that. Just think about the colonies England had. Australia, which was pretty strategic for controlling that area of the Pacific, and then India, and then South Africa again. An important. Apparently, that is the most dangerous waters where you have to go around if you're trying to circumnavigate the globe, and you go. The Cape off of South Africa is pretty dangerous. For what it's worth, I'm a factoid kind of guy.
Are you? It does remind me of the Birkenhead drill. One day we got to do a podcast on that. It's one of my favorite real life all time stories.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Oh man,
that's rough.
It's a rough one. All right, but it's a very manly one. It's one that highlights really good values. But anyway, to move on from this point, so we don't linger too long, there's a promise to descendants of Israel, descendants of Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. So Jacob and Israel are kind of what's the word? Synonyms? They're not synonyms. Anyway, they're replaceable. There's a promise to the descendants that they would possess these things. And again, if you're trying to find out, well, where are these descendants there? Where can we find them? This is not a promise that was ever fulfilled in the same way by Judah. It simply was not. You're going to look at the other 10 tribes, and then you do see peoples in the world that have fulfilled these things. Again, is one of the many things that sold me. Well, if it's not these nations, if it's not these, say, British descended, related nations, then what other nations did? What other nations have fulfilled these promises? And you look through history, and you just don't find any. So let's move to the fourth point we want to make today. So let's kind of review those points. The first one was, you got to start with the understanding of the split between the northern nation of Israel and the smaller southern nation of Judah. Secondly, that Israel would become many nations. In what way did Judah ever fulfill that? And then this promise concerning the gates of their enemies. And now, let's see, the fourth point. A specific son of Joseph was prophesied to become many nations all on his own. And now you're not just looking at Abraham, or for that matter, Isaac, or even for that matter, Jacob or Israel. You're looking at a very particular son of Israel. And this never happened with Judah or the Jews. And so there's no way you would connect this promise of becoming many nations to Judah and that nation or the Jews. So the question is, well, who was it? And the Bible, that's Ephraim in Genesis chapter 35 and verse 11. Jacob's grandson, he's blessing his grandsons. Ephraim was the younger, and yet God was actually going to give him the larger blessing, really more the firstborn kind of blessing. And as he does, he says of Ephraim through Jacob, he says, a nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. Well, either the tribe of Ephraim is out there in the world somewhere, or God's prophecy has failed. Either there's a tribe out there, there's a people out there that has become many nations, including with a royal status, or else this is just some kind of fiction. And I don't believe God crafts fiction like that.
I think that's safe to say. Well, I remember growing up, and at least the way the curriculum was in the public schools is it was 6th grade was U.S. history, 7th grade was Texas history, and 8th grade was U.S. history, I think. And I remember they had. I was so easily manipulated. So we're going through U.S. history, and they give you a quiz that's like, oh, would you have been loyal to the King of England during the Revolutionary War, or would you have been on the side of we didn't call them rebels. What do we call the?
Well, they want you to think good guys.
The good guys, right? The ones who wanted America to become its own
nation. The revolution, the forces, right?
Yeah, and one of the questions was, a tiny little island nation shouldn't be in control of the United States. And it's a kind of a hopefully funny way of making the point, which is it is so improbable that England, just go back about 400 years ago, this tiny little nation suddenly had a population explosion, suddenly started to become wealthy, built all these amazing ships, traveled all around the world, and founded colonies here that eventually became their own nations. I mean, like that to me, if you were going to describe what modern England or modern Ephraim, better known now as England, Wales, well, Scotland's included in that, Northern Ireland, then just call them a nation and a company of nations. I mean, that is the perfect description of them, and how improbable that would have ever happened.
Oh yeah, what an excellent point, Mr. Robinson. It is the case. If you were to go back and look at let's say you were visiting, from an alien planet somewhere, and you come to Earth, and it's at the height of the British Empire, and you arrive on Earth, and you've been given a tour of the whole planet, and you're seeing this vast kingdom with outposts here, with sitting in governments there, controlling lands with people that are vastly different from them in different parts of the world, all over the planet. And you would ask, wow, well, where are the original peoples? Where do these peoples come from? And then you were taken to this tiny island nation in this one place. You'd think, yeah, I don't know about that. Really? Are you sure?
Right.
The people from this one little country are controlling this vast portion of your planet. It is hard to imagine any nation in the world that satisfies this like the British people do. You'd have to sell me on it being a different, it'd be a hard sell. But if you're trying to convince me the things that we understand from the Bible are not true, that would be a task for you. And I don't see it.
Nope.
I don't see it. It's
Nope.
good
Good point.
biblical evidence. All right. The fifth one is that we want to talk about today on the podcast, at least. Another biblical piece of evidence is that Joseph, again, what is Joseph? Joseph is one of the 12 sons who himself had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who are become two different tribes, two different inheritances, but are brothers. Joseph is prophesied to be what appears to be a colonial power of great military might, or colonial powers. He has two sons. And again, we don't see Judah and the Jews satisfying this. It's not that Judah and the Jews don't satisfy some prophecies. They certainly do. But we do not see the Jews in modern Israel satisfying this kind of sense of being a colonial power of military. Now, they definitely have military might, and there's other prophecies concerning Judah's military might, but not these kind of colonial powers. And so when you see Joseph, the father of Ephraim and Manasseh, the promise given to him in Genesis chapter 49, says there in Genesis 49 that he would be a fruitful bough. Bough? I always have a hard time with that word. I'm saying it right. The bough of a tree.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for that confirmation.
Yes.
A fruitful. I always want to say bow, like dough. It's spelled like dough.
No, I get that. Like every so often, the word that you know pretty well just sounds weird in your head, and you're like, "Am I saying that right?"
Yeah, well, it helps or hurts, I guess, maybe in the sense that it helps overall that I'm married to a wonderful woman who makes a lot of dough. I don't mean dough money. I mean literal dough. She's a great bread baker. Okay, off track. A beautiful bough.
I can confirm. She is.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. So a beautiful bough, and that's like a limb from a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
This fruitful limb by a well. His branches run over the wall that is outside of the bounds of the normal place for this tree. And then it says the archers have bitterly grieved him, but his bow, in this case it is bow, remained in strength.
If you go back again, the last 3, 4, I don't know where you want to start with when. I think there is a date where you can kind of mark where Old England was a very powerful nation. But for the last 300 or 400 years, the world has been dominated by descendants of Israel. The British Army was not to be trifled with. The Redcoats, and that's an oversimplification, were one of the most elite fighting forces in the world for 200-300 years, and all the way up to World War II. And then after that, the United States took over. And though we know that this is prophesied to change, his bow remained strong, and the military power remained strong. I mean, who's been the most dominant military powers over the last 300 or 400 years?
Yeah.
It's been the U.S. and the UK.
Now the UK, not so much anymore.
Yes.
But that said, that's actually, it's kind of beyond the scope of today's discussion. But they have, really as the one that has the firstborn rights of the two, Ephraim and Manasseh being the tribe that has become the United States. Right. Really, God's kind of that way. Like he says, when he talks about blessings to the Jew first and then to the Greeks, then he says, same thing with the cursings, to the Jew first and then to the Greeks. It's kind of the same way. You're the first one to be blessed, but you're also the first one to experience the decline. And we definitely see Ephraim taking more of a backseat militarily these days with the rise of the United States, especially after World War II.
But I really like the point you're making about how the tribe of Judah cannot ever fulfill this, because the 10 tribes went into captivity, and about 100 years later, because they were separate nations, that was your point at the beginning, that Judah went into captivity roughly 100 years later. And I thought this was really interesting, and the reason I really this stuck with me is because I was doing a little research about the time between the end of the Old Testament and the time of the New Testament. And what you have is in Ezra and Nehemiah, it records the Jews coming back from captivity. We're just talking about the Jews. The other 10 tribes did not come back from captivity in the same way. Maybe small little pockets here and there. But essentially, we're talking about the Jews and their descendants. And they were never, ever the same. God put them back in there, but they never grew big again because they were still having some of the same problems. And then when you see, well, how's the area of around Jerusalem and where the Jews were last we heard were there at the end of the Old Testament, you find them still there, but occupied by the Romans. Like they just never achieved any kind of large scale success, especially not the way you would say that Ephraim and Manasseh has had success, and they've always been and even then they didn't keep their land over the last 2,000 years, and were scattered among the nations for a while until they were regathered after World War II.
Yeah, even in their strength today, though I'm not going to speak to their spy networks and such, even in their strength today, Israel is a regional power. It's the United States, the United Kingdom that have gone over the wall, so to speak. They have projected their power into virtually any part of the world. You really do see that far more with the UK and with the British people, but then also the United States. And you don't see that in Judah.
One last minor point, because I know we're going to go to the next point. I think what's interesting about Genesis 49 is that Joseph sits down to bless his kids, but he talks about, let me tell you what is going to befall you in the end times. And he goes on to describe each tribe by tribe. But what's interesting is it's also given like little personality traits. And so to me, that I always took that to understand that the end time fulfillments and the end time nations of the 10 tribes in their modern form would have identifiable traits to them. And I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It's people may not like to think of it this way, but the fact is the Bible does talk about a people having characteristics, and that God using that and speaking of that. And definitely so. There's a little bit of personality, you see, I think, there in Genesis chapter 49. In fact, we're going to read some more from Genesis 49, and we're on the last two things. So hang on. You're doing great. You're still with us. Good job. We have two more things. The next one is that Judah was promised a line of kings, but it was Joseph who was promised the birthright. And I had to bring this up a little bit earlier from the earlier point, but the fact is these are two distinct promises. When it comes to Judah and a line of kings coming from Judah, we see that, speaking of Genesis chapter 49. In Genesis 49, Judah is told, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And in that particular case, this is also a prophecy of Jesus Christ. And Paul makes much of this in the book of Hebrews, that Jesus is of the line of Judah. It's Judah that produces a line of kings. And anyway, that's the promise of the scepter, if you will. But Joseph has promises as well. And this is where we're going to get into the Reuben thing. In Genesis chapter 27, verses 28 through 29, Joseph is told, dew of heaven, fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. So many evangelicals out there apply that just to the nation of Israel in terms of that, but recognize how many people have gone up against the United States, the United Kingdom, and regretted it. You know, it has been a bad thing for them in general, and countries have been rewarded who have come into their coattails, so to speak. But in terms of the birthright, it's specifically addressed. Actually, if you go outside of Genesis, you get a very specific account in terms of what has happened and how did the birthright switch to Joseph. And it's in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. That's where we read, now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was, it's not like it's getting parenthetical now, he was indeed the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph. Who is that? The sons of Joseph are Ephraim and Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright. Yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. Wow, it's like they're banging a pipe right next to our room. So that distinction is there. That is not a made up distinction. That's a biblical distinction. That there's a promise of leaders to come from Judah, kings and royalty. And yet at the same time, the actual birthright, in terms of the physical inheritances, the key part of that was given to Joseph. So kings from Judah, which means the Jews, but birthright from Joseph, which means Ephraim and Manasseh. Those are different inheritances. And we see in Genesis chapter 37 that it prophesies that Joseph's brothers would even bow to him. Not Judah's brothers, Joseph's brothers would bow to him. Now, of course, that happened in type, certainly in the land of Egypt. But it's easy to see, if he was going to get the birthright, that it's very plausible to consider that was actually prophetic for later circumstances. So the last one, Mr. Robinson. We're about to do it. I feel excited, and I'm kind of hoping, because we do plan on recording a second podcast later today, because Mr. Robinson is going to be out next week, and I always like it if we can do one together instead of y'all being stuck listening to me by myself. And I'm kind of hoping that our crew outside decides to take a good long break, so by the time we get back, maybe...
Well, we're hoping they're finished today.
Well, at the same time, that's true. It would be nice for them to finish today. And it's funny, I keep thinking, we'll have to listen to the recording later, that we keep talking about it and nobody can hear it in the world. They might just think we're going crazy.
Before we kind of go into the wrap-up point, I really feel like we should mention Ezekiel 37, because to me, it's one of the strongest evidence of, it's a strong point in our favor about our understanding of the ancient tribes and the modern tribes, and to support what you were just talking about their various identities. And I'd mentioned Ezekiel 37 verses 15 through 17. You can read the whole section, but it says, I'll read it to you just real quick. Again, the word of the Lord. So this is the context of this is clearly in the future. In fact, I think it's the Valley of Dry Bones is the first part of, it's the first part of that. Anyway, again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the houses of Israel his companions. Then join them one to another for yourself into one stick, and they will become one in your hand. So this ancient split after Solomon's son Rehoboam kind of... There's actually quite a bit into why the split occurred, so let's not go into that detail. But this ancient split of the tribes will finally be healed in the millennium, and I just think that's and the way it's visualized here, I think is a great way of looking at it.
And it's definitely a prophecy of the future. He says later in the chapter, talking about making them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, having one king over them, talks about giving them David as a king. There are a lot of details there, and it is a beautiful passage. And I'm really glad you brought up Mr. Robinson, because I want to say young 18-year-old, 19-year-old me who was encountering this for the first time, that was one of the things that really sold me on the idea that, when the Bible talks about Israel, it's not always talking about the Jews, that they really are two separate peoples in so many of these prophecies. And that's an excellent reference. Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah. Keep reading. No, serious. I'm actually glancing through this here again, and there's actually quite a bit more, but that we won't go on about.
Oh, yeah, but we encourage you. You are, by the way, if we never say it officially, encouraged to read the Bible, even when you're not listening to the podcast. So we do hope you will.
We have a booklet about this.
We do have a booklet about this, so please get that one too. All right, the last point then, as we'll wrap up. Here we are getting close to the end of our time. And that is really actually a comment that these things should all be put together. The last point is that these details and others help us to identify the modern lost tribes of Israel. Just consider first, one, we have to recognize these are facts, which we're putting these facts together in our seventh point. Modern Israel, the Jews, the Jewish people today, they did not satisfy many of these prophecies. It's just a fact. There's no debate about this, and it's not even a controversial thing. It's not a negative thing. They just simply did not.
Yeah, we're not reading into this because the Jews never fully abandoned the Sabbath, and so they have this identifying sign that has carried them down all through the last couple thousand years. We've never lost sight of the Jews in some sense because of that sign.
That's right. They've been a consistent people. They've kept that sign of the people by keeping the Sabbath, versus Israel abandoned all that kind of stuff
immediately.
Yeah, and therefore lost their understanding of who they were. And so we need to ask ourselves, with this fact in place, do we believe that God's prophecies have actually failed? Do we believe that all of those prophecies he made about Israel, he was just kidding? It's like, I'm not going to do all that stuff I said I was going to do. I'm not going to bring all these things to Israel like I said I was going to do. You're not going to fulfill all these things I said you were. Nah, just I was just kidding. It was kind of a joke. JK. Just kidding. Well, that's ludicrous, right? I hope we agree that's ludicrous. Well, if we don't think it's ludicrous, if we don't think God's prophecies have failed, then there's only one question left, which is, what nations in the world has fulfilled these prophecies? And I invite you to look throughout history, look at all the nations of the world, and to see We're not talking about trying to trace genealogies or trying to track, the migration patterns or any of those things. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of that stuff really is wonderfully supportive evidence here and there and anecdotes. We're just asking you to look at the Bible and then ask yourself, what nations in the world have fulfilled all of these prophecies? Well, you put them all together. You look at the choicest lands in the world. People have just said the United States has like one of the single best pieces of real estate from ocean to ocean than you could find any place else in the world in terms of river system, in terms of all the details. You look at multiple nations coming from one single people, multiple different nations coming from one single people. You look at administrative and geographical control of their own enemies in the world. You look at powerful militaries and colonial powers that would expand into all the world. You look at all these promises. There's simply no other sound choice in human history but to conclude that the English-speaking peoples and their descendants, the United Kingdom, the U.S., and others, have fulfilled these, being Ephraim and Manasseh specifically, but then also looking more broadly at some other nations that seem to fit, but not necessarily in the, if you will, the firstborn place, not in terms of the birthright place, but the other tribes as well. That's why we draw the conclusions that we do. I'm not saying migration patterns after captivity and such aren't helpful. If you do look at some of that evidence, you do see, well, here's how that's possible. You do see a connection like that. I'd even encourage you in the Germany booklet to take a look at how we treat that kind of migration pattern to see the plausibility of it.
Well, the way I would contextualize that is, if we make a bold claim like ancient Israel is still around in its modern form. Oh, really? Where did you get that from? Well, the Bible actually has quite a bit of evidence that the tribes will stay intact and some will have lost their identity but be powerful nations. Oh, well, is there any historical evidence of that? Well, actually, there is. There is some migration, and I actually, believe it or not, like the one of the Dan naming landmarks after their father as they go along.
Oh, yeah, that's really fascinating.
Danube River and all in Danesmark, Denmark. So there really is quite a bit of evidence, but it just seems to be so, well, I don't even know how to characterize it. Like the idea to most people is it crazy?
Yeah, and it really could be very convincing to some. Maybe that's actually, I know in my case though, I needed to see it from the Bible. Because I've seen a lot of wacky theories. I've seen a lot of evidence, quote unquote, about a lot of different things. Alien bases on the moon. I've seen evidence that this is the wonder thing you should eat. Oh, guess what? Here's this other evidence that says if you eat that, it's going to kill you. You got to eat this other thing. There's a lot of evidence, quote unquote, out there. But in the end, like the Apostle Paul says, let God be true and every man a liar. To me, when I look in the Bible and I see these things, even if you began piling up physical evidence and academic evidence against this identification, I'm sorry, I'm always going to trump such things with the Bible. We have to understand, like Jesus Christ said in John 17:17, his word is truth. And if the only way to conclude that God has kept his promises is to make these identifications, or else to say that I guess we don't even read the Bible because it doesn't make any sense at all, well, then that's the conclusion I'm going to draw. And we'd encourage you, again, read the article when it comes out. In fact, you might read the article and think, oh boy, Mr. Wahovich covered it way better than you guys did, Smith and Robinson.
He probably did.
They probably did. Definitely in more detail. But then also, if you're just looking for some Bible study to do come the Sabbath, you're looking to really go in detail on something maybe you haven't in a long time, then don't just read the article, but grab a copy of Mr. John Ogwyn's booklet on the United States and Great Britain in Prophecy. You can order it online. It's free like everything else, and take the time to go through it with your Bible open. And you'll find prophecy starts to come alive in a way it never had before until you understood how to identify these nations.
I want to correct one mistake I made. I think earlier I attributed hey, here's what the tribes are going to be like in the latter days. And I think I attributed that to Joseph. It's actually Jacob. Jacob calls all his sons together and says, here's what will befall you in the last days. It's not like in the future. It's the final days. So we should be able to find them. And then there's descriptions of the tribal personalities. And not to relitigate the entire podcast, but you're right, though. I mean, not only, like if the Bible is true, not only is this not crazy, we should expect to find evidence of the lost, the quote unquote lost 10 tribes somewhere on the earth.
Absolutely. If God said it, we expect it to be true. And the Bible should be not just sufficient evidence for us, it should be deciding evidence.